right, welcome to our portion. We're going to talk about navigating CCL's 2024 policy roadmap. So, you want to click the slide?
Hopefully we'll have some slides soon.
All right, we've got slides for you. They're great. I'll start off by just saying that whether you are brand new or whether you have been a volunteer for many years, hopefully it's clear to you that we work on policies to stop the pollution that's overheating the planet, right? That's our goal. And so Dana's going to get into the nitty-gritty here in a few minutes, but that's really the headline. So as a climate organization, that's our guiding principle for what we choose to support, the policy areas that we choose to engage in. We want to stop the pollution that's overheating the planet. So how are we going to do that exactly? Well, CCL believes that big national climate policy from Congress is the way to do it. And so we have a handful of major policy areas that we work in, and at the beginning of the year, we laid out this policy roadmap. If you were on our January national meeting, you might have seen it. So there are road signs all along the roadmap that point to activities that we're doing this year in each area. So you see there at the beginning, there's carbon pricing, permitting reform, healthy forests, electrification, and election season, which has been well covered by Brett and Nathaniel. So we are not going to go over election stuff anymore. But Dana's going to walk us through, for the next 20 minutes, he's going to walk us through the 4 policy areas. And then we'll pop back to this roadmap, and I'll show you the impact that we've been making so far this year in each of those areas already. And again, remember, Dana's just going to give us an overview. If you want to dive deeper, then there are breakout sessions all throughout the rest of the conference where you can really get into the details. So, all right, Dana, over to you.
Yeah, so let's do a quick overview of our 4 policy areas. We're going to start with carbon pricing, of course, because that's what we've been advocating for, putting a price on carbon pollution since CCL was born. Our carbon pricing advocacy is now almost old enough to vote itself, so it's nice and it's mature. So our preferred policy is, of course, a carbon fee and dividend, where we start by putting a price on the carbon pollution at its source, where the coal comes out of the mine or the oil and gas comes out of the well. And then our preferred approach takes that revenue, sends it all back to households in equally sized carbon cashback checks. And then our third leg of the stool is that we have a carbon border adjustment, where if American companies are paying for this carbon price and they export their stuff to countries that don't have a carbon price, then we refund that carbon fee at the border. Or if we're importing stuff from countries that don't have a carbon price to our country, then we apply the fee at the border so that everybody's on an equal playing field. This is important because we don't want to disadvantage American companies when we put the carbon price on. When we do a carbon border adjustment, we could potentially also take account of the carbon content of the products coming from the United States or other countries. The benefit there is that American companies already make relatively low carbon materials, and we're going to try to prove that with the Prove It Act, which you guys are going to advocate for in a couple of days here. So there are a lot of really good reasons to love this policy. First and foremost, when we put a price on carbon pollution, it creates the market incentive for innovation, for people to come up with clean, cheap, low-carbon solutions to replace our dirty fossil fuels. And then the carbon cash back puts money in our pockets, which for anybody with a relatively low carbon footprint, which especially includes almost all low and middle income households, they will then break even or come out ahead from that cash back payments. And as a bonus, that means that the policy will reduce income inequality and poverty as well. And then by reducing air pollution, we can let Americans live healthier, happier, longer lives. And really importantly, we have to get a carbon price to have a really good chance of meeting our Paris commitments of cutting our climate pollution 50% by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. There was just a really good paper that looked at that question: what policies can help us achieve those Paris commitments? And you can see some of their outcomes here. These are for climate policies that don't include a carbon price, and you can see in the red triangle there are Paris commitments. And you can see all these policies that don't include a carbon price come well short of meeting our Paris commitments. But then when they looked at policies that do include a carbon price, you can see they either come close or meet or exceed our Paris commitments. So that's a really important policy solution. The details, it depends on the details, but if you want to learn about those details, I have a breakout session tomorrow at 2:45 in Regency about post-IRA, in the Empire Room, about post-IRA carbon pricing. Is that a pretty good shameless self-promotion of my event tomorrow?
All right, so back to the roadmap, this time with pins dropped all along the way showing the milestones that we've achieved so far this year. So the pins in light green are the ones showing the impacts we've made specifically in the area of carbon pricing. So first, the Prove It Act that Dana mentioned. We've had some exciting movement so far. So the very first one you see here is this Senate Environment and Public Works Committee announced that they would mark up the Prove It Act in January. So we mobilized calls from volunteers in the 19 states of the senators on the committee, and our calls and engagement there actually helped this bill pass the Senate committee with even more bipartisan support than expected. So yeah, clap for that. And we continue to engage. So in March, we had a campaign to send messages to Congress. So we sent 8,747 messages urging co-sponsorship of the Prove It Act, so continuing to build support. And then we also have a mobilization this month around it. So we're asking volunteers to call, and they've placed 898 calls so far. We're aiming at 3,000. And of course, the Prove It Act is one of our primary asks for lobbying on Tuesday. So at least 432 of our confirmed lobby meetings we expect will be talking about the Prove It Act. And then one other carbon pricing related push that we did earlier this year was in May. We sent 9,574 messages to Congress sharing those findings that Dana was mentioning, the Hamilton and Brookings Institution research about how effective, how impactful a carbon price really would be. We sent these 9,000 plus messages to Congress, making sure that they have seen that research and that they know what a huge help it would be to meeting our climate goals. So we've really been keeping up the drumbeat on carbon pricing strong so far this year.
Totally. All right, so the next up we'll cover clean energy permitting reform, which is really important. There was an analysis by these energy modelers at Princeton after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed that found that if we don't start building our clean energy infrastructure and especially our electrical transmission infrastructure faster, then we're only going to achieve about half of the potential emissions cuts from the Inflation Reduction Act and other climate policies that we've recently passed. So just some quick basics. What is a permit? A permit is an official authorization from a local or state or federal government to start the construction of a certain project. And that's a really important process because we want to make sure that we're protecting communities and workers and environments from the undue harm of operating and constructing those projects and that infrastructure. But getting a permit, it takes time, it takes money, and so you have to try to find the sweet spot where you're doing a thorough permitting process, but not taking so long that we're unduly delaying this rapid transition to a clean energy economy that we need to make. And so we're trying to get into that sweet spot. Right now, we're kind of erring on the side of taking too long to get our permits authorized. And so some ways to speed that up. We've done a few things so far. We got the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act passed. Those had some legal changes and some funding to help get some clean energy infrastructure built faster. There's also executive actions and rulemaking from federal agencies. We saw a bunch of recent rulemakings from federal agencies in the last couple of months, basically doing what they can to expedite the permitting process. So those have been really helpful. But by itself, that's not enough to kind of meet the speed and scale of the deployment of clean energy and the rapid permitting that we need to do. And so kind of the next thing that we can do is get Congress to pass some comprehensive bipartisan permitting reform, and that's where CSIL comes in. That's what we'll be lobbying for again on Tuesday. So specifically, we're trying to get policies that add to our capacity to transmit clean electricity, which will also improve the security of our power grid, and to speed up the approval of the clean energy projects that are waiting in line to be built right now. And we also want to make sure we're preserving communities' ability to make their voices heard on the environmental and other impacts of energy projects in their communities. Because one concern is that if you speed up and expedite the permitting process, you might inadvertently cut out people's voices, and we want to make sure that we're not doing that.
All right, so permitting was our first major action of the year. We sent 11,476 messages to Congress. I should clarify, when I say we sent, y'all sent. This was the volunteers. So volunteers like you and everyone else back at home sent those messages in January asking for more bipartisan engagement or working on a bipartisan package for permitting reform. And then this was also the focus of our lobby meetings at our Conservative Climate Conference and Lobby Day in March. Their primary ask was for the Big Wires Act and other measures to speed up the clean energy permitting process. And of course, as Dana mentioned, on Tuesday is one of our other primary asks.
That's right. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about healthy forests, which is another great policy area. It's got a lot of potential to achieve significant carbon reductions as those trees grow and pull the carbon out of the atmosphere. So they can both mitigate the problem that way, and they can also help us to adapt and become more resilient, because we're seeing more and more of these extreme heat waves as a result of global warming, and trees provide some nice shade and other cooling benefits to help us become more resilient to those. So there's lots of potential co-benefits like that. There's also lots of good research on the physical and mental health benefits of being around trees. There's also lots of potential coalition partners, because lots of groups are working on tree and forest-related solutions, and lots of bipartisan support, because just about everybody loves trees. Yeah, woo. So far, right now, we've got lots of forests already in the United States, and those forests are moving about 12% of the greenhouse gases that we Americans put into the atmosphere every year by burning fossil fuels. We could almost double that number, increase it by about another 10% with some good forest policy solutions. And about half of that potential stems from reforestation, which is basically planting trees where there used to be forests a long time ago. And so this pie chart kind of illustrates why we're focusing specifically on healthy forests. This is the natural carbon removal that's happening right now in the United States. You can see almost three-quarters of it comes from existing forests, trees growing in our existing forests. Another 13% from trees growing in cities, 10% from reforestation, planting new trees and expanding our forests. So that's 97% of our natural carbon removal today is coming from forests, and then another 3% comes from farming. And then this chart shows the potential future carbon removal from natural sources in the United States. You can see all the green ones on the left are tree and forest-related solutions. The two big ones are forest management, which is when we harvest trees, trying to do it in a way that has less impact on the surrounding trees and the soils, so they can continue to retain their carbon. And then reforestation, again, which is planting more trees, for which the Seedlings Act that we're going to advocate for as a secondary ask is really important, because as Bob Ross would put it, we want lots of happy little trees growing up in our forests.
All right, so in February, we mobilized around the Farm Bill, which has a lot of climate funding and potential for related forestry policies in it. So y'all generated 11,329 messages to Congress in February about that climate smart funding. Also, the Increased TSP Access Act, which is something that we're watching that could be part of the Farm Bill, was a secondary ask at the Conservative Climate Conference and Lobby Day. And we saw after our volunteers were on the Hill, they lobbied on that in March, we saw one new conservative senator and a couple more House Republicans jump on as co-sponsors after our volunteers had these meetings and spoke to them about the Increased TSP Access Act. And then later in the spring, also that bill that Dana just mentioned, the Seedlings for Sustainable Habitat Restoration Act. That's something that we used as a secondary ask in last year's June Lobby Day. In the spring, we started to see a little bit of movement where that passed committee just a few weeks ago. So lots of different places to make impact there on the healthy forests area.
Absolutely. All right, so last but not least, we have building electrification and efficiency. So here we've gotten a lot done already when we got the Inflation Reduction Act passed, because that had lots of incentives for homeowners to electrify and make their homes more efficient. This is a nice illustration by an artist showing all of the different incentives for homeowners to make their homes more electrified and efficient. Things from space and water heat pumps to induction stoves to better insulation and solar panels and electric car charging and things like that. To learn about those, there's this great tool called the Rewiring America IRA Savings Calculator, which you can get to by going to this short URL here, cclusa.org/IRA-calc. And once you get there, you just put in your household information, and it will tell you all of the great incentives that you qualify for to electrify and make your home more energy efficient. And it'll tell you whether they're tax credits or rebates and how large they are, and so on and so forth. So it's a great tool to learn what your options are and to spread the word to everybody else you know, to make sure that people are taking advantage of these great and really important incentives. So that's the IRA. We have an electrification action team that's doing lots of great stuff, hosting lots of good workshops to educate people. They teamed up with our youth action team to do the Great School Electrification Challenge, where they're getting school districts all around the country to electrify their school buildings, having lots of great successes there. That's been a really good program. And then we're doing lots of state and local efforts to get electrification policies in place as well.
So, as Dana mentioned, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and so they are not currently doing much else on electrification. They've sort of checked that box. So that's why we haven't done a Congress-focused mobilization around electrification, but what we are planning for later in the year, for the month of August, is Electrification Month, where we'll be focused on outreach. So we're gonna have fresh tabling materials for you. Our chapters will be hard at work talking about these incentives and all sorts of ways that people can make this transition. And so stay tuned for Electrification Month in August.
Yeah, that's a good month. All right, so we're going to quickly just put this all into context in a graph because I cannot resist a good graph. And so here you can see our greenhouse gas emissions from the United States between 2005 and 2023 going down very slowly. In the dashed line at the bottom, you can see our Paris target of 50% cuts by 2030. Before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, that was basically the path we were on there, headed for about 27% cuts by 2030, more than halfway short, or almost halfway short, of our Paris commitments. And so the IRA by itself will get us a few percent more, maybe to 31% cuts or so. And then if we can also spread the word about those electrification and weatherization opportunities, we can get a few more percentages out of the Inflation Reduction Act, to about 33% cuts by 2030. And then if we can get clean energy permitting reform passed, maximize the potential of the Inflation Reduction Act, we can then get to 40% cuts by 2030. Then we're going to get a carbon price passed, get another 10% emissions cuts. That'll get us to 50%. The carbon price. And that gets us to our Paris commitment. But we're not going to stop there. We also still have the Healthy Forest Policy area. And that's going to pull maybe 5% more of our emissions out of the atmosphere, get us to 55% below 2005 by 2030, blow past our Paris targets. Set a good example for the rest of the world by not just meeting, but surpassing our Paris commitments. So it's an ambitious goal, but that's what we try to do. We try to be very ambitious here at CCL, right, Flannery?
Absolutely. All right, so thank you. Let's give a big round of applause to Dana, who knows all the things. All right, so now we're going to hear from some of our volunteers about how they are bringing these policy areas to life. So I want to welcome to the stage Steffi Rausch from North Carolina, Izel Nira from Florida, and Brian Thornton from Nevada. We're going to hear a little bit from them. So, of course, we know we are always at all times working on carbon pricing. And so we've invited these folks here to talk a little bit about some of the other policy areas. And so, Steffi, you want to start off and tell us about your work on the Healthy Forests policy area?
Right. Okay, so this is working. In North Carolina, we have a very conservative area, and everyone loves a good farmer. They have an amazing way of making things very nonpartisan and talking in that way. We have farmers in our area that are very small farms and in the mountains, and they tend to do more regenerative ag techniques. Our representative was kind of tired of hearing about carbon pricing and wanted something new. And I had been trying to talk to farmers over the last few years, and it just seemed like a natural transition He also tended to start up some kind of an ag board, and one of them was on it. And after talking to a few of them, they decided that they would go into a meeting with a representative in district, so we set that up. And amazingly, the 2 asks that we had for him in that meeting, after them talking about their regenerative ag techniques, so it was very little time, not enough to talk about it, was number 1, would he join the Conservative Climate Caucus? And he did. And number 2, would he entertain getting out and coming to their farms for a farm tour? And he said yes. So with that, we set up the farm tour. It took several months to get there, but we did, and we went to 2 of the 5 farmers' farms. One had a major flooding event, who I had called after that flood had happened. I'd seen it in the paper. The other was practicing agroforestry, which was really cool to see, and they did such a great job of explaining everything. He actually brought his top staffer. He brought a photographer. We had a photo op. I've never seen a representative go that far. He loved it. He learned a lot, and then he wrote afterwards on his newsletter and social media, of which we also then promoted too. And we asked him during the farm tour if he would co-sponsor the TSB Access Act, of which the farmers, only one really knew about that and had utilized it. The others did not, so it was really good for them to learn in the process. But he co-sponsored it, and we now are planning, hopefully if I have time, to get to writing an op-ed about what he did and thanking him for all of his efforts in that regard. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right, Isel, let's come to you to hear about what you've been up to on electrification.
Yes, thank you, Flannery. My name's Isel for everyone here, and I actually just graduated high school 3 weeks ago, but when I was in high school...
Congratulations.
Thank you. But when I was in high school, my senior year, I decided to start a climate action club. So I was hoping to get more young people involved in the fight for climate justice, and immediately we were super intrigued by the Great Electrification Challenge. So we kind of set that as a goal and started going at it. So initially I thought it would be good to get a feel for how receptive the school board would be towards the idea of electrification. So I started out by reaching out to a younger school board member named Alexandra Ayala, and she connected me with representatives from the school board district. And so through that, I was able to organize for the representatives to come to my school during lunch, meet with my club, and we basically presented the idea of electrifying our cooling systems and our bus fleets. And to my surprise, they were actually super receptive. They were super happy to hear that we were trying to do that. But then they kind of eased me back in reality and told me that it wouldn't necessarily be possible for at least a couple of more years because of other logistical issues. So, for example, there's currently a bus driver shortage, so they can't really prioritize electrifying buses until that issue is resolved. But they were super open to the ideas, and they were totally on our side and willing to collaborate. So their openness to that idea and their receptiveness kind of inspired me to try to find other alternative ways that we could increase sustainability around campus. So through that, because I had that contact with my school board member, Alexandra Ayala, I ended up meeting with her again in a virtual meeting to discuss other ways that we could increase sustainability on campus. And mainly the focus was on reducing waste because of the cafeteria system. The students were seeing that there's a lot of excessive waste and single-use plastics and a lot of styrofoam use and different things like that. So she showed her appreciation to us, and we really felt valued by her and everything. So after that, we decided to take it to the entire school board. So actually, during April in Earth Week, we went to a school board meeting, my team and I, and we all kind of spoke about different things, including how to reduce waste on campus and the different things. And then we also brought up again the longer term goal of electrification to try to get that in their heads once again. And afterwards, what ended up happening is that a month later, my school district committed to reducing plastic use on campuses by 25% in the upcoming school year. And they also committed to be entirely foam-free by 2025. And the last thing that they did is that they made a work order process so that we have different reusable like water bottle stations on campus. So they created a process if any issues arise with those stations, they can report it to the district and get that fixed as soon as possible. And for context, Palm Beach County School District is the 10th largest district in the entire United States. So for them to take this step, for me, was really significant. And although ultimately we weren't able to immediately achieve electrification, I feel like the connections that we've been able to make with school board member Alexandra Ayala and the rest of the school board, I hope that we can keep building these relationships until one day electrification can be possible and we can keep taking these smaller steps towards progress as well.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. All right, and Brian, let's hear what you've been up to in the area of permitting reform.
Well, it's more about what the state's been up to. Permitting reform has really done three things for us in Nevada. One is it's brought together the chapters to work together. I'll talk about that. It's helped us to rebuild and extend our relationship with Representative Amodei, and it has strengthened our relationship with the Reno-Sparks Chamber of Commerce. So in terms of the statewide support, we created a permitting team across the whole state, bringing the chapters together that has been meeting, and Michelle Hamilton, the state coordinator, started that, and then our former state coordinator, Wayne Willis, extended that and is continuing to lead that. And what it did was, as a group, we investigated what was going on with permitting reform in the state, and we actually discovered that in Nevada, there's been considerable progress, and things are moving in a pretty good direction. But that dialogue now continues with a regular communication about national permitting reform, and has brought, as I said, the chapters together. In terms of Representative Amodei, we had a strong relationship there that Midge Breeden built over a number of years, but towards the end of 2022, it kind of got stagnant. We couldn't go any further. We'd reached an impasse on carbon fee and dividend. There was support for carbon pricing, but not for the dividend. And so we actually had a period with no meetings. And then last year, as permitting reform got on our agenda, Tim McFerrin, the co-liaison, and I were able to kind of restart that dialogue, and permitting reform became a big part of that, because Representative Amodei is very interested in mining permitting reform, Nevada being a big mining state. And then he's also interested in geothermal, which is a resource that's important in Nevada and has great opportunity, as well as litigation reform, which is one of the 4 elements that we're going to be talking about in the lobbying this time. And so it really has generated a new dialogue and a new opportunity to talk with our representative. Related to that, we also have a relationship with the Reno-Sparks Chamber of Commerce, and we again had not been able to go very far with CF&D. They weren't willing to commit to that or endorse it or write letters, but permitting reform seemed to be a little closer to the core of their policy interests. And so I was able to get the CEO of the Reno-Sparks Chamber of Commerce to participate in the letter writing campaign that we're doing for the current lobbying effort. And she wrote letters to our congresspeople, including Representative Amodei, who's in District 2, our district. And so we're going to be able to highlight those letters here on Tuesday. And we hope in particular that that will help, again, strengthen the relationship with Amodei. So not only is it helping our relationship with the Reno-Sparks Chamber of Commerce, but again, will strengthen our relationship with our legislators. So.
Incredible.
So it's been a good opportunity for us in Nevada.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm struck by hearing all three of your stories is just that how much the new policy areas are opening up new pathways and new creative ways to build momentum and really make positive change. So one more round of applause for our volunteers. So unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but again, if you want to dive deeper into any of these policy areas, find the relevant breakout, and you'll have plenty of time to ask questions there. I think that is it for now. We have a 10-minute break coming up, yes, 10-minute break. And so one more round of applause for our volunteers, and then we'll see you back in this room. Okay.
Thank you.